Hi everyone, this latest video tells the story of the 1835 Wallsend pit disaster, and as many of you will know, this disaster is something that is very close to my heart. Growing up in Wallsend, I had no idea that it had even happened, and it wasn't until much later that I found out more of the details of the disaster. The story itself is a tragic one, but knowing that they were all buried unmarked in a mass grave and still remain so has always made me feel very sad. I totally understand that at the time of the disaster, those left behind needed the money to live rather than memorials and headstones, but I have always felt that the colliery owners could have done a little bit more. I've always said that these are real people. They had families, they lived and worked in Wallsend, and they shopped in Wallsend, and yet it's as if they never existed. They need to be renamed and remembered for the real people that they were. In 1994, Wallsend Local History Society, with the help of some other organisations, were able to raise money to obtain a plaque, a photo of which you can see on the screens at the moment. Several years ago, I started to think of looking at a way to fund a bigger memorial to stand as close as possible to where the miners are buried. The exact location of the mass graves is not known. The larger memorial would have each and every one of them named on plaques somewhat similar to that of the Hartley Colliery Disaster Memorial at Wallsend. The wheels were finally put in motion in 2019, but sadly the pandemic put things on hold. However, with the fab team of helpers I am working with, who all feel the same as me, I know we'll be back on the job as soon as possible. For anyone interested, there is a Wallsend 1835 project group on Facebook if you'd like to join. Wallsend Colliery, or G Pit or Church Pit, opened in 1802. This is a photo of a sketch of the pit. William Russell opened the colliery, and some of the subsequent owners were Losh, Wilson, Bell and Company, and then later the Wallsend and Hebben Coal Company. The following is an account of the disaster. On Thursday, June the 18th at 1835 at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a dreadful explosion took place at Mr. Russell's colliery, Wallsend, known at the time by the name of either Church Pit, G Pit or Russell's Old Wallsend. The explosion killed 26 men, 75 boys, leaving numerous widows and 83 children without fathers. The number of workers employed at the colliery at this time was around about 220. The colliery had been viewed in the morning by Mr. Atkinson and his son, who were both underviewers, and it was them who considered it to be perfectly safe and secure in every respect. There was no indication of any escape of gas. At the time of the explosion, there were also 4 overmen and deputies down the mine who had been accustomed to working there for upwards of 30 years. The explosion was described by the banksman as being like an earthquake, accompanied by a rushing of choke damp to the mouth of the shaft, bringing up with it some of the pitmen's clothes and other light articles from the bottom. This next photo is a photo of the colliery, which could be from somewhere quite close to that time. Obviously it's not going to be 1835, there weren't exactly photographers rushing around in those days. There were 2 other shafts connected with this colliery, in one of which only 2 men were at work, who say that they felt a slight shock at the time and soon after a quantity of choke damp. They escaped by being drawn up immediately. In the 3rd shaft there was no one at work. As soon as the alarm was raised, crowds of wives and family members gathered in the vicinity of the mine. It was described as an awful scene of sorrow, and I can't even begin to imagine how it must have felt to stand and wait in the hope that your loved ones would be rescued, with nothing that you could do, knowing that some of those loved ones were children as young as 8 years old. The scene must have been absolutely horrendous. The rescue mission began straight away, and 8 miners volunteered to go down in the hope of being able to save and bring up some of their companions. John Buddle had suggested it was not safe to do so yet, as he felt that the gas may still be present and might cause problems for anyone entering. And after reaching the bottom, the volunteers instantly found themselves to be suffocated by the foul air. They had great difficulty in regaining the ropes and were almost insensible before they could be drawn up again. Such was the dangerous state of the mine that it was decided that all further attempts would have to be postponed until the following day. How can any of us imagine that feeling? For the families not knowing if their loved ones were alive or dead, and knowing that this pain and distress would continue until the next day. Did they stand at the scene taking comfort from each other, or did they try to return to their homes until the rescue mission resumed? On Friday, efforts were renewed. John Buddle himself was part of the rescue team, and the first 21 bodies were recovered that day. The work continued day after day until all of the bodies had been found and taken to their family homes, apart from one poor boy, J. Heppel, who was not found until August the 11th. In some of the homes, fathers and sons lay side by side in deathbeds. To the astonishment of everyone connected with the colliery, on Sunday 4 of the miners were found to be alive. They were immediately brought up with as much care as possible. The poor men could give no clue as to how they had survived. For some of the time they were delirious from the gas, and they had no idea of the amount of time that had elapsed between the disaster and that of their rescue. The scene at Wallsend on the following Monday afternoon was another distressing and painful sight, with sometimes 2 and even 3 bodies being brought from the same houses, amid the agonised cries of their remaining families. The bodies were buried in what can only be described as, I believe, 2 trenches in St. Peter's churchyard. At the time, the families were asked by the colliery owners if they would like a memorial or of some kind, but the need for money for food and a roof over their heads was far greater to them than any headstone could possibly have been, thus leaving the graves unmarked. A list of names of those who lost their lives can be seen on the screen at the moment. I'm not sure how clearly this will show. It was very hard to get photos of the names, but I hope that you can see them and that you can read some of them. There are 3 photos because obviously there's an awful lot of names. So this is the first one, and this is the stupid mouse. This is the second one. Stupid mouse has a mind of its own. Of the 4 survivors, 3 men and 1 boy. 1 needed a leg amputated and another was badly burnt, and one of them, John Reed, sadly died on the 3rd of July from his injuries. 102 miners and 10 or 11 horses were killed. Some stories vary on the number of horses killed, and the ages of those who died ranged from 8 years old to 76. On Monday, June the 22nd, an inquest was held on the bodies of the sufferers, which continued on the 23rd, the 25th and again on the 27th, during which time some of the jurors visited those who had survived. The inquest was originally opened at John Buddle's office, but was moved to the larger Wesleyan schoolhouse. John Buddle, underviewer and viewer at Wallsend Colliery. Wallsend Colliery is the photo, you can see it on your screen at the moment, obviously from a much later date. He had worked at Wallsend Colliery for 43 years. He told the jury that there were 3 downcast shafts and 2 upcast at Wallsend. He said that the Bensham seam was more difficult to work than the high main. 2 small water cannons were kept at the mine to extinguish gas fires, and small fires were actually often put out using the men's jackets. Davy lamps had to be used, but there was an implication that miners might be tempted to use candles, which provided better light. The candle idea also seems, during the inquest, to have been a way in which to explain what had caused the explosion. Miners often lit their pipes from Davy lamps, and this was perhaps also mentioned as a way that the gas could have ignited. In the end, the verdict of the inquest was that of accidental death. The owners of the colliery did not have to pay any compensation to the families whose loved ones had perished. However, a disaster fund was established, and William Russell's contribution was 200 guineas. John Buddle's contribution was 20 guineas. Several churches in the area also contributed to the fund, which came in total to just over £2,000. Each widow who lost a husband was given £2, and each widow who lost a son was given a weekly allowance of 2 shillings and sixpence, and 1 shilling for each child under the age of 9. The fund lasted just over 6 years. William Russell also provided the coffins and £1 towards the cost of the funeral for each man and child. I have often asked myself the question, who was the undertaker in Wallsend at the time, and how did they manage to acquire enough coffins at such short notice? I can imagine people working day and night to be able to provide what was needed, as the funerals happened so quickly from the day of the disaster. I suppose that this is something I'll probably never find the answer to. The G-pit shaft was still open in the 1950s and could be reached by foot, apparently underground from the Rising Sun pit. The photo on the screen shows G-pit sometime after it closed, with just a few of the buildings remaining in place. This next photo shows the current view of one of the shafts of G-pit, which I took last year. If you can't quite make out where it is, I'll just move the mouse around the centre of the screen there. You can just see the cap on the top of the shaft. This next photo, I'm not really sure how it came about. It certainly doesn't depict what was actually in place at St. Peter's, and seems to be more a memorial that was perhaps printed in newspapers at the time of the disaster. And this last photo shows another article as it appeared in the newspapers at the time of the disaster. It's not very easy to read. In fact, I don't think anybody can read it at all. It was originally a very small photo, and even enlarging it, you just lose what's written on it. Obviously, there is a lot more that I could have told about this story. There are details of things that went on in the days between the disaster, etc., and leading up to the funerals. However, I'm trying to keep it as short as possible, as I don't want to bore people with these little videos. But I hope everyone has enjoyed this video, and I just want to say that I have used information from the Durham Mining Museum, and also from the wonderful Ken Hutchinson's book about the disaster, and also from a much older book titled The Dreadful Explosion at Wallsend Colliery, to gather together my own notes. But although that I've used this original information, this is basically my interpretation of what was available. And that is all for this video. See ya.